obviously, maybe it's not obvious, maybe it is. I'm not law enforcement, and I don't know if you all have already heard this before, but, you know, you all can be intimidating, because you can arrest people and stuff. And so I was a little bit nervous about, you know, how do I make sure I build a connection and build a bond? Because you're law enforcement, you're tough, and I believe in saving the world with fluff and unicorns and gum drops. And so really the most profound connection I could come up with was last week when I was driving my kids home from Great Wolf Lodge in Williamsburg, Virginia. I got pulled over for speeding. And I wanted to know I was very, very respectful to the officer. So I hope that connects us. Are we good? Are we good? And I didn't say anything about the fact that every mile, every blessed mile, it switched from 65 to 70. And, you know, so in between, I'm like, which am I? And I happen to call it wrong, like 13 miles per hour, and one thing after another. But I owned my mistake and honored the officer who arrested me. I mean, did the ticket. So my personal mission in life, my personal legacy that I want to leave is simple. As a result of my life on the planet, I want less people to experience violence. And that is partly informed by my own intersection with violence. But I'm connected to the reality there is nothing I can do about what has happened to me. And it's actually more fueled, that mantra for me is more fueled by my kids. I've got 4 incredible kids. I've got a daughter that's going to be 21. And so she can drink for the first time. And I've got triplets that are 9 years old that are just a joy. No, I was just kidding. They really are. So I've got these they really are. If they ever saw how I use them, they are extraordinary kids, and truly I am driven by this simple idea. I am driven by the notion that I can pass on something better to them. I will not stand up here in front of you and talk about ending violence. I think we're too complicated of human beings right now, and ending isn't in our short-term plans. But I do think there is enough evidence, both in research and just in human history, to suggest that we can reduce it. That the numbers that faced me do not have to be the numbers, the statistics, that odds that face my kids. And my hope is, in the brief period of time I have, that I can convey, perhaps reignite, fan a little bit more as you go back to probably among the most difficult jobs on the planet. This idea, number one, that you are a part of this change that I know can happen, and number two, to remind you there is communities out there that if we can effectively pull them in, they can take us where we need to get. So I used to, when I would talk about my kids, since they're such a source of inspiration for me, I used to actually bring a picture of them and put them up on the slides. I quit doing it because it began to create tension. Because folks like you would look up at it, and you'd look at my kids and then begin to feel so bad about your own. And the jealousy, the tension, then you would just be like, what did I do wrong? How come my kids? And then they'd begin to look at their partner or their spouse and go, it's your side of the family, and if that's why our kids aren't as cool as hers. So I've quit. I've quit doing that. And this is one of the things that I'm going to say, I'm just kidding, but that you know in my heart I really think I'm not, that really my kids are better than yours. So I wanted to tell you, I'm sure they're not. I'm sure your kids are great. I'm sure they're great, like mine are a joy. I want to start by telling you a little bit about what I do and what Green Dot is. Green Dot is a violence prevention strategy, and my hope is that really to kind of lay that foundation and then talk about perhaps some applications to what you're doing. Hopefully you will find some threads, some seeds that might tie back into kind of community-orienting policing and the work that you are doing back on the front lines. Green Dot specifically is focused on violence prevention in the area of sexual assault, dating violence, domestic violence, bullying, kind of that interpersonal kind of, that umbrella. And so a lot of those examples will be the examples that I pulled from, but again, I think there's probably applications across other types of crime. So when we're talking about violence, when we're talking about sexual assault, dating violence, child abuse, bullying, that umbrella, we are talking about numbers that are so big. You know, we spout out stats like 1 in 3, 1 in 4, 1 in 5, huge, huge numbers. And when we're talking about numbers that big, and we're going to have a realistic conversation about prevention, we have to talk about culture change. And there is no one I've ever met anywhere who wants the solution to their problem to be culture change. Like, oh, no problem. All you got to do is head on back and just change the culture of your community. And people go, oh, I'm on it, boss. It's a hard concept to do something with, because you stand in front of a group of people, whether it's colleagues in the field or whether it's a group of college students or community members, and you say, we need to change the culture. They kind of look at you with one of two looks. Either I'm not even sure what you're talking about, or they look at you with, I know exactly what you're talking about, but I'm just one person, and I can't possibly change the culture. And so either way, this idea, when you put it out there, is hard for people to grab onto and do something with. So I don't want the challenge to be culture change, but you don't always get what you want in life. And I believe it's about culture change. The good news is culture change happens all the time. We are not trying to do something that has never been done before. And we can talk about, you know, kind of the quick, trendy culture changes, how we dress, how we do our hairstyles. There's a new look coming back into town. The kind of music we listen to, how we listen to music. You know, the little, back in my day, it was the boombox, you know, and now it's like, if you can get 8 million songs on a player this big, now you're cool and popular. So you can do trendy kind of culture changes that we can literally watch in front of us, or we can talk about more substantive. You know, I just had a visit with my eldest daughter, who's 20, and my mother, and we spent 3 or 4 days together, and just had this conversation, and talking to my mother about what the world looked like when she was coming up, and the kind of options she saw for her, the kind of choices. Can I ever leave the house? Can I get educated? Can I be anything but a nurse or a teacher? Can I? And then talking to my daughter, who thinks she can do anything, like thinks the world is an oyster to her. And I look at those differences that I get to watch in my lifetime and go, not just trendy culture change is possible, but profound, permanent, deep-rooted culture change is possible. This isn't if this can happen, this is how do we make it happen? How do we create the culture change necessary to kind of raise that foundation, raise that baseline around those numbers? How do we make, instead of 1 in 3, 1 in 4, 1 in 5, how do we make it 1 in 10, 1 in 20, 1 in 30? How do we do this? So I was contemplating that very thing, and about 5 or 6, 7 years ago. And I happened to be, when I was contemplating how does culture change, witnessing in front of my very eyes, arguably, the most profound cultural change of this generation, and that is the advent of Facebook, right? Facebook. The thing about Facebook is we literally got, like before 2006, it didn't exist, right? And so literally, I got to watch in real time us go from a non-Facebooking culture to a totally Facebooking culture. And I get to go, how did that happen? And what are the applications to what we're doing, right? And so I began to, when I was first contemplating this, the movie hadn't come out yet, so there's some creative license here, but the story I kind of played out in my head is there's this guy, Mark, sometimes I call him the Markster, the Mark man. There's Mark Zuckerberg, and he's in Harvard, and he's super duper smart about such things, right? And so Mark is sitting in his room, and he's pushing a lot of keys on a computer. And these keys that are pushing are impressively sequenced in such a way that smart things begin to happen. And sometimes he's so smart, he has to write things on his window, if you watch the movie. So he is doing all of this, and at the end of all of the smart things and pushing buttons, he takes that last step, and he takes the 2 or 3 minutes it takes to enter his email and create a password. And there's the first ever Facebook account. And I said to myself, okay, did Mark just change the culture? And I said, nope. Mark is just sitting in his Harvard room pushing buttons on a computer. He didn't just change the culture. But Mark realizes, in a very short period of time, he realizes that status updating yourself on your phone and then responding on your computer just makes you feel lonelier, right? So it would be funner if he had more people. That was kind of funny, like he's Facebooking himself. I'm assuming the carbs just kicked in, because that warranted at least a giggle. Since you laughed at the first couple, we'll let that one slide. So Mark talks to 2 or 3 of his friends, and he says, hey, I've got this thing, and each of those 2 or 3 friends take 2 or 3 minutes to put in their email and create a password. And now you got 5 people at Harvard, and I go, did they change the culture? And I went, no, not yet. Just these friends are now doing this thing, right? Well, these 5 or 6 friends begin to take it to their class, and over the course of just a couple of weeks, it goes from 5 or 6 to several dozen to several hundred people that each took 2 or 3 minutes to put in an email and create a password. And I said, beginning to change the culture? Well, certainly at Harvard, it was beginning to change the culture. And then it leapt from Harvard to a bunch of Ivy Leagues, and now we go from several hundred to several thousand to several tens of thousands of people that each took 2 or 3 minutes. Beginning to change the culture? Yeah, through the colleges, right? And then it jumps the ocean, and then pretty soon it jumps from colleges to high school, and then we go from hundreds of thousands to millions to tens of millions of people that each took 2 or 3 minutes. And I go, culture change? Absolutely culture change. And then it takes this final big leap, and it moves from the youngsters to the grown-ups. And if I were a betting woman, which I'm not, because where I grew up it was illegal, and I'm law-abiding. If I were a betting woman, I would have said Facebook would have died the day the grown-ups came. But counterintuitively, not only did it not die, but it doubled, because now all the kids had to have their real Facebook account for their friends and then their fake one for their parents, right? So hit the jackpot. So in front of my very eyes, I watch this thing happen. I watch us go from non-Facebook into Facebook. And the question I have asked myself is, when did it happen? When did it go from 1 or 2, 3 people doing their own thing to a culture change? 1 Facebook account? 20 individual decisions to open an account? 100 million? When does it tip? And what I realized is I don't have any idea when it switches. Which is an awkward end to this talk, but nonetheless. I don't have any idea when it switches, but what I connected to, my now seemingly obvious epiphany, was not when it happened, but that it did happen. That culture change isn't this distant phenomenon that happens in some magic cloud somewhere. Culture change happens the exact same way every single time. A bunch of individuals do some teeny tiny thing. And when enough of those individuals do that teeny tiny thing, something shifts. Every single time. So I took that idea, that realization, and I connected it to an image that is very familiar to all of us through both kind of movies and popular media and news and things like that. And that's the image of kind of the computer-generated map that has single red dots, each representing 1 case of something contagious, right? Of something, I first pulled the scene from the movie Outbreak with Dustin Hoffman, and it was monkeys, and so I've got the scene, and there's these single red dots, each representing something horribly contagious, and there's always some climactic moment where some kind of 4-star looking general person is giving a report to the president. Mr. President, you know, we've got 5 cases of, you know, monkey cooties, and if we don't get the cure in the next 24 hours, this is what's going to happen, dun, dun, dun. And then these 5 or 6 single red dots begin to multiply, right? They begin to go, and in just a matter of seconds, it goes from 4 or 5 individual cases to an epidemic. Question is the same. If I were watching it in slow motion, when would I freeze frame and say, gosh, this isn't about counting individual cases anymore. This has now crossed the line to an epidemic, to something bigger. I don't know when it changes. I just know that it does. I just know that at some point, teeny tiny things become something bigger. Then I took one more leap with that. And I went to, now instead of kind of a fictitious map in a movie, I pulled up a map of my own community, however that's defined for folks. And this time, instead of a single red dot being monkey cooties, a single red dot is one choice, one moment in time where someone uses their words, their actions, their behaviors to contribute to or to tolerate violence. So here's this map of our community, and there's one red dot. And that red dot is the single choice someone made to raise their hand up against someone and in a split second bring it down. It's a choice this big, about as big as opening a Facebook account. There's the first red dot on the map. Another red dot on the map is a single choice someone makes some random Tuesday night to have sex with someone without their consent. One choice, about this big. Another red dot on our map. A red dot on our map is the 4 or 5 minutes someone uses their words to intimidate, to threaten, to coerce, to frighten. Another red dot on the map. A red dot on the map is that moment in a grocery store or walking through the mall or home around dinner time when that parent crosses that line with their kid. That single choice, that single moment, there's another red dot on the map. And it is not only, make no mistake, it is not only those actions of violence that leave red dots on our map, but it's the choices of inaction. It's when we're at that bar and we see something out of the corner of our eye and it gets our gut. You know, we know, and we're going, that doesn't look okay. Or we've noticed a change in behavior with one of our family members or maybe a colleague or someone from church, and they've had some marks and they're wearing sweaters in the winter, and we're going, gosh, since they've been in this in the summer, gosh, since they've been in this relationship, something's telling me, and our gut gets activated. And before we make the choice to do anything, all these things come to our head. Well, it's none of my business. Well, if I say something, I could get hurt. Well, I'm not sure what to do. Well, I don't want to make a scene. Well, what happens between them should stay between them. All of these messages go through our head, and then we make that choice to turn our head and pretend we never saw anything. And regardless of best intentions, there's no way around the fact that enough of those choices of inaction inevitably lead to more red dots on that map. And I have no idea how many specifically, you probably all know better than me, how many specifically in any given community red dots are on the map. I don't know how many. What I know is there are too many, and that there are enough that we are all here trying to figure out how do we do this even better, how do we do this even better. And the point I'm trying to make is that this kind of violence isn't a single solid mass. It's not a statistic. Violence is like Facebook. It is a bunch of these individual moments, these individual, very manageable choices that happen, that at some point accumulate, just like Facebook, at some point accumulate to these unacceptable statistics, to these unacceptable rates of violence in our community. And the reality is, the solution has to be a reflection of that reality. The solution has to come down to moments in the same way the violence comes down to moments. And for lack of a better metaphor, the solution we called a green dot. And the green dot is a single moment in time that someone uses their words, their voices, their action to make it less likely the next red dot gets on the map. And we talk about two different kinds of green dots. We talk about proactive and reactive. And reactive is just what it sounds like. If I see something, if I see a potential red dot, I react. I do something to make it less likely it's going to happen. So there was a story I heard of a young woman on college campus who was getting onto an elevator her freshman year. Early on, she'd been partying heavy. She gets on the elevator. She's so drunk she can barely see straight. And as soon as she gets on, two young men get in right after her, and they're trying to convince her to get off on their floor. And when the doors open up, she said, I was so drunk that I just began to stumble after them. And she said, Dorothy, I had no idea there was even anyone else on the elevator. But right before I stepped off, this hand reached out and touched my arm and said, sweetie, this is the all-guys floor. Let me get you back to your room. That single moment, literally from the time of sweetie to the time of tucking her into her bed, probably was about the same time it takes to open a Facebook account. And inevitably, that choice, that single green dot choice, resulted in one less rape on our campus. This guy who had been through a green dot training and we had been talking about the green dot moment and you can do something. And he went back to his fraternity a couple of weekends later, and there was a big party going on, and he saw one of his friends doing something that he'd seen done a million times in this particular fraternity, which is take a drunk girl up to this designated room in the back, right? And so he sees them heading up the stairs, and he said, Dorothy, I've seen this 100 times, and I knew I needed to do something. But the social cost was so high if I stepped in and said anything directly. So instead, he called up the stairs and he said, hey, dude, your car's getting towed. And so his friend did exactly what he knew. He came running down the stairs to check on his car because they didn't have the $75 to get their car out of tow. And while he's gone, the woman's friends got her out of there. And the guy comes back, no, it wasn't. Oh, somebody said it was. Anyways, we're going to play beer pong. Was there some kind of big, direct confrontation that night? There wasn't. Was there one less rape that night? There was. This single decision, this single individual moment. A reactive green dot is a conversation. It's going up to somebody saying, hey, I'm worried about you. Is everything okay? A reactive green dot is, again, one of these direct confrontations. Man, I think she's saying, back off. I think she's wanting her space here. It's this single moment. To do a reactive green dot doesn't mean you have to become a police officer. It doesn't mean you have to switch what you're doing and become a women's studies major and care all about violence against women. It doesn't mean it can just be this teeny tiny Facebook-sized moment. The proactive green dot takes it a step further. And it says, even if as a community member, I never directly witnessed a potential act of violence, a potential red dot, what are the things I could be doing to establish some clear norms in my community? And the norms I'm talking about are, number one, violence won't be tolerated. Number two, in our community, everyone looks out for each other. Everyone steps in. We have each other's backs. How do you establish those norms? And that's what proactive green dots are. And this isn't a magic question. You establish those norms by what you do and what you say. Up until a couple of years ago, I worked at the University of Kentucky, and I don't know how familiar you are with them, but they have a pretty good basketball program. That's right, national champions. As it turns out, unfortunately for someone who spent 5 years at UK, I don't care about basketball. But you know what? You don't have a successful career at UK if you don't care about basketball. So I used to try to build rapport by making fun of the fact that I didn't care, and they were like, not funny. Not funny. So I used to ask the students, so some stranger from a different state who's never heard of UK and they never heard that they're supposed to bleed blue for the Wildcats, how do they learn that the norm here is you got to care about basketball? And the hands would fly up. They'd say, well, it's what we talk about. I mean, they wouldn't go 5 minutes without hearing somebody saying, are you watching the game? Did you see that play last night? How about this new coach? You hear who we're recruiting? Oh, did you see that ref's call? It's what we talk about all the time. It's what we wear. We wear the T-shirts, I bleed blue. It's what's on our walls. Right? On our walls are the posters and the calendars and the dates of the games. It's how we spend our time. Going to the game, waiting in line for tickets to the game, talking about the game afterwards. It's what we write our letters to the editor about. It's what they say and what they do. It's not a magic formula. So proactive green dots is, how do you make it clear violence won't be tolerated and everyone in this community looks out for each other? It's a conversation. It's literally leaving here today and talking to someone that isn't here and going, gosh, I wonder how this applies. I wonder not just kind of professionally, but personally. I wonder if our kids know what we expect from them in terms of looking out for each other. I wonder if there's some conversations to be had. Maybe it's something we put on our email signature line. Maybe it's a link to a local resource center with some bystander tips. Maybe it's, talk about Facebook. Let me ask you a question, and you have to be honest. And maybe this is lower in a group like this, but how many of you have ever posted something on Facebook that was a waste of both your time and everyone that read it? Be honest. Really? 2 people? Oh, okay. Well, many people that aren't you post things like, I just ate a good brownie. Delish, right? And then 18 people respond to it, and there are 47 likes to it, you know? So we spend a lot of time on Facebook, but the interesting thing is, I'm friends with like 50 people from my high school that I haven't talked to in 20 years. But when I watch their, what's it called, the stream, the media feed, or whatever it is, when I watch that, and I stand in line and I read a couple of them, it only takes a couple of times of reading that I begin to figure out what matters to them. I haven't talked to them in 20 years, but I can figure out the ones that their faith is really important to them. I can figure out the ones that, you know, are into, there's one that's constantly posting about all the marathons she's running. You know, oh, I ran another marathon in 14 minutes. And I'm like, I took the stairs when I was at the COPS conference. You ain't all that, right? But to be honest, even though you all weren't honest about Facebook, I'll be honest and admit I only took the stairs when I was going down. I took the elevator and at least I was honest. And so this idea of what are the teeny tiny moments we can capture, and the model of Green Dot, the moral of the story is simple. Just like every other culture change that has come before, violence will be reduced. Will continue to be reduced, will be reduced more when the green dots outnumber the red. When the green dots begin to outnumber and displace the red dots, these single moments begin to displace, outnumber the red dots, the violence comes down. That's how Facebook was created. That's how the gray stripe is going to come back, one single decision at a time. This is how culture is going to change. This isn't pie in the sky. Some people confuse my passion for naivete. And I'm not naive. I've been assaulted. My daughter's been assaulted. I've been in this field a long time. The human cost is too high for me to be naive. I am telling you, the numbers are on our side. I am telling you, the research is out there. What we know is in any given community, there are more people not committing the targeted form of violence than are. Sexual assault, rape, sexual assault. What we know is non-sexually violent people outnumber sexually violent people somewhere between 20 and 40 to 1. Okay? So create this mental picture. Here is a potential perpetrator, and here is a potential victim. And according to the research, there are literally somewhere between 20 and 40 of our community members who never have, never will, or fundamentally opposed to the sexual assault standing there. We got 20 to 40 potential green dot number generators to this one potential red dot generator. You tell me it's unrealistic to think those 40 people couldn't stop that one. You're telling me it's unrealistic that even if we didn't get all 40, like I'm not naive. I know we can't walk into every room and they go, yes, I'm on board, go green dots. Like a lot of them, maybe we'll get out of those 40, maybe we'll get 22. Maybe we'll get 7. But you know what? Even the odds of 7 to 1 work in our favor. Here is our challenge. We know we've got the population there. We know I've got that 40 people that aren't committing the assault. And probably if I asked them directly, is rape okay with you? They'd go, no. The problem is, not can they help us? Can they stop it? The problem is, are they? Because it doesn't matter how many people are standing here if what they ultimately do is go and just let this thing happen right in front of them. So our challenge, your challenge, my challenge, anyone that's interested in reducing violence, our challenge is, how do we mobilize these people? What is the problem here? How is it that we've got these communities filled with people who fundamentally agree with us, who don't want crime in their communities, who don't want people being raped, who don't want people being beaten, who don't want children being abused? What's the problem? Why aren't we having to deal with, oh gosh, we've got more volunteers than we can deal with here. We need to turn some away. Why isn't that our problem? I'd like to shed some light on that. Our challenge is mobilizing these people. And to do that, we've got to understand, why aren't they mobilized now? Why aren't they mobilized now? And so I'd like to share with you in my last, am I down to 10 minutes? All right, I'm down to 10, but I'm going to take 45. I'm totally kidding. That was purely for the person that's arranging, so she'd go, I'm just kidding. I'll stop in 10. I want to share a short list. Believe me, this list could be much longer, but I'd like to share a short list that I like to call 3 sure strategies for failing to engage and mobilize your community that have been tried by Dorothy Edwards. For those of you taking notes, that's 3 sure strategies. I want to share with you 3 kind of missteps I've taken in my attempts to engage these 40 people in between and go, what can we learn from that? And where are places that I course corrected? And what I'd like you to consider is the ones that I say that you've never done before, you can just kind of giggle and judge me because that's just good, clean fun. But the ones that you can identify with, going, how do we address this? How do we tweak this? The first sure fail strategy that I tried for a long time, as it turns out, for engaging and mobilizing people, our community members, one failed strategy I used was leading off with telling people they are bad. That's right. That's why the director invited me here, for those profound pearls of wisdom. It is not an effective strategy to start off with some version of you're bad if you want to engage people. And it sounds silly, but there was this misstep that happened when we figured out that we had more to work with than just potential perpetrators or potential victims. When we figured out we actually had this larger community of bystanders, right? Folks that fundamentally agree with us that we could mobilize, these people in between. We took a couple of missteps. And one was, we really came in with this sense of, this conversation was a lot like this. When there was an act of violence that happened, a crime that happened, and there were bystanders that didn't do anything, it sounded a lot like this. What kind of person could just stand by when such a thing was happening? What kind of person, what heartless, callous, apathetic kind of person could just stand by? What's wrong with you? What if it were your sister? Like this long barrage of, there is something wrong with you because you didn't step up. The reality is, everyone in our communities, most of us in this room included, we're the kind of person that could not stand up, even when we wanted to. In real life, all of us have reasons that in certain contexts, it's hard for us to stand up. Sometimes they're personal reasons. I'm shy, I don't want to make a scene, I don't know what to say. Sometimes it's very fear-based. If I step up, whether you're talking about a middle schooler saying, if I step up to the bully, he could hurt me, or whether when I'm working with inner city gangs going, Dorothy, you snitches get stitches. Like I step up, Dorothy, and there's going to be actually a cost to my personal safety. Sometimes it's fear-based. Sometimes it's peer-based. Working with folks going, you don't understand, if I step on this kind of thing, the social cost is going to be, sometimes within institutions, it's about a job. It's about, gosh, it's my boss, or it's about, gosh, if you break the code and you say something. Professionally, there could be repercussions. Sometimes we all have reasons. Sometimes it's about the family. We don't talk about these things in our family. We don't talk about these things. We all have these obstacles. And the problem is, if I lead off with, only bad people don't stand up, what that means is, people are going to go, okay. Because who's going to be the one to raise their hand and say, well, I'm a bad person, because this is what makes it hard for me. And if we don't have a conversation, a realistic, non-judgmental conversation, about what makes it hard for our community members to stand up, then we will never have a realistic conversation about solutions. Do you understand that? Do you understand if I'm standing there with a fraternity and I say to them, do the right thing, a real UK Wildcat will stand up and confront their brother. And they nod politely and say, yes, ma'am, okay, ma'am. But I never once have an honest conversation about the social cost, the peer pressure, the expectations, the fear of safety. If I don't ever have, they're just going to nod politely, and they're going to leave that room no more likely to stand up than before they came in. I got to have a conversation that says, I understand we all have obstacles. A non-judgmental conversation where I go, I understand we've all got obstacles, and I'm going to assume whatever obstacles you came into the room with, you're going to leave with. If you're afraid for your safety when you came into the room, you're going to be afraid when you leave. If you're shy when you come into the room, you're going to be shy when you leave. And I got to go, not get over being shy, get over being afraid. I got to say, what could you do despite your fear? So maybe you're not the one that can do something direct. Maybe you're the one that's going to have to send an anonymous note to the cops. Maybe you're the one that's going to have to get your extroverted best friend to do it. Maybe you're going to be the one that goes, hey, I think somebody called the cops, and get that party dispersed. Maybe you're going to have to delegate, distract the guy who called up and said, hey, your car's getting towed. If the only option I gave him was you got to stand up and confront your buddy or you're a bad person, that rape wouldn't have been stopped that night. But because I said, you know what, I understand it's hard to confront your buddy. Let's talk about other options. And suddenly he went, oh. Well, if the only option isn't the social cost of confronting my buddy, well, there are some things I could do. So the application of this is the first thing I'd like us to consider is when we're interacting with our communities, when we're talking to the people around us, we got to stay realistic. We got to talk without judgment about, yes, it can be hard sometimes, because the obstacles people face aren't imaginary, they're real. And going, we know it's hard sometimes, so let's talk about things you can do. Let's talk about things you can do, even having those obstacles. The second failed strategy I used, there were so many. Let me look at which one I wanted to tell you in particular. Was assuming people care more than they do. Have you ever sat at dinner with somebody who cares much more about their kids than you do, and they go on and on and on and on, and you begin to glaze over? Well, very often I've done that. I've stepped into a room of people, and I haven't just said, hey, help me stop rape, which all 40 of those people would agree with. I went on a little bit further and said, and help us deconstruct the societal underpinnings that support this culture of rape. Not only do you have to care about rape, but you can no longer laugh at sexist jokes even if they're funny, and you can no longer play violent video games, and you can never say the word bitch, and you can't listen to rap, and you can't. I lost them at hello. They just don't care as much as I do, and they never will. And instead of setting the bar up here to step into prevention with us, we got to go, what is the lowest common denominator? Where's the place people can agree? Because you know what? I step into a room and I do a poll. Most of them say, yep, rape is bad. That's where I got to start. I got to start with, that's all we got to agree on. I don't care about your sexist language. I don't care if you're not perfect in these other ways. Let's agree rape is bad and give them points of entry. The application here, the second kind of moral to this story is, as you think about ways of engaging your communities, there's got to be a spectrum of options that range from, I barely care, to, I want to grow up and be a cop when I want to grow up and be a cop. There's got to be that whole spectrum. So people that are, because the majority of people barely care, right? Or at least are too busy to care much more, you got to give them. You mobilize all those tiny moments to become something bigger. The final piece as I wrap up is, wait for it, now I'm just building tension. Failed strategies excluding people. And I just bring this up because I'm guilty of it. People that don't agree with us, people that don't have our politics, the people aren't quite perfect yet, the people that don't have our same philosophy, the people that don't buy in as much as us, politics, personalities, ego, there's all sorts of reasons we try to make our club pretty exclusive. And the fact is we can't afford to be exclusive. If we in this room could bring down the numbers where we want them, there wouldn't be the need to mobilize our communities. There wouldn't be the need for bystander interventions. And I experienced that firsthand. I used to have self-righteous philosophical conversations about feminist philosophy and language and all of this nonsense. And then my daughter was raped. And suddenly I realized there were 2 bystanders there that night, and suddenly I realized if one of them, either one of them would have stepped in, I wouldn't care if they were laughing at sexist jokes. I wouldn't care if after they saved my daughter, they went home and played Grand Theft Auto. I wouldn't care if they bought into my philosophy. And so this idea of beggars can't be choosers, and we're beggars. Let's include everyone we can possibly include as we try to mobilize. I'd like to challenge you, I know I have to stop, I'd like to challenge you to take some of these concepts, and even though I've talked within the context of mobilizing our communities, I always apply the same concepts to my work in my company. And I challenge you, especially those of you in supervisory positions, I challenge you to look at these same concepts within the workplace. All of us want a workplace that constantly uphold the standards, the values that we have, that we adhere to. And what do we do when we've got folks within our organizations that don't? And how do we empower those around us to step in, to get involved? What are you doing to communicate to your officers? Hey, there are safe ways that you can step in and intervene. There are safe ways you can communicate. There are safe ways we can course correct that get around your obstacles. There are applications here that go beyond the work outside. Takeaways, talking points should be proactively legitimizing bystander obstacles. The second one, when you're talking to your communities, your mantra should be 0 personal growth required. You can step into this even if you don't want to evolve as a human being. The third and final is build on common points of consensus. Don't set the bar too high. Don't set the bar too high. I want to leave you with this is possible. We're seeing great success. Our challenge for those 40 people in between is to reignite the possibility that these communities can be better, reignite the hope, and then drop in people's hand simple, realistic, manageable green dots, single moments they can do to help us get a little bit further down the road of prevention. Thank you for your work on behalf of me and my kids, and thank you for your time.